What do we got on the schedule today? I think we're still on
Well,
the domains, right?
yeah, the next domain we're going to be talking about is the work of the project or the project work. This is a little confusing because even when we were studying under the fifth and the sixth edition of the PMBOK, there was a lack of real clarity of what the project manager should be doing in this space. And let's talk about while the deliverable is being created and the work's going, what the project manager should be doing. So I have a little story to actually put this in context, okay?
Cool. Nice.
So here I was in 1992. We had a newly created organization inside of a transportation company, and I was part of a branch of IT that was working locally in the transportation facilities, one of the big warehousers they had throughout the region. And my supervisor had said, okay, each one of you is a project manager. And yeah, I'm going to give you each project so that you learn how to get work done within a business environment, which was brilliant. He uses the context of projects to actually show how you can make changes inside of a business. Well, it was troublesome because here we were all right out of college and we knew how to do the work, but we didn't know how to manage and lead. So the next 2 years that he worked with us wasn't the work. He expected us to be experts and be able to do the work, which we were. What he worked on was what we were supposed to be doing as project managers in order to get the work done.
Hmm.
See, I've learned since then I'm much better actually working through people through influence and facilitation. And it actually allowed me to try these skills that I felt comfortable and very satisfied with and start stepping away from the technology of the work. Now, that's not to mean I haven't kept up with it. It's just that I know there are people who are much more passionate about the technology, and it's their job to stay the most current and help me in figuring out how that technology impacts the work of the project. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. And here's what I want to do. Here's how I want to start this off based on the story that you just told or your experience.
Uh-huh.
But also looking at this, that when I first looked at the domains, and I know we covered them briefly in past podcasts, but now we're going through them one by one as well. When I first looked at the one called Project Work, I thought, how is that different than what we always did in project management called execution? And and they've got these separate domains of stakeholder management and team management and development approach and planning and delivery. To me, that's all project work. But maybe for the benefit of our audience, especially those who are coming up through the ranks of project management and using PMBOK 7, the project management body of knowledge version 7, as their guideline, it's probably a good way to differentiate between what is meant by the domain of project work versus getting the job done, which are all the other domains. So, my thought, and also alluding back to your story, I think if I were to describe it, is to set the environment, the culture, the processes, those things in motion so that the delivery can be done. Is that a good way of defining it?
Yes, that's the role of the project manager in the domain of project work. It's
Cool.
exactly right. So if we think about it, you have the work performed to create the deliverable, which also generates data.
Yeah.
So you are going to be establishing the processes. And what you're talking about, the PMBOK says you establish the processes. You create the environment, you set the team up for success, you ensure that they're coming together. All of these components are fitting together as the work starts to progress.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I
Yeah.
think I think that'll help our audience too, so that as we progress through this podcast, they'll understand where we're coming from and why we're not talking about actual physical creation of deliverables, but we're talking about all of the environmental factors that go into project work.
Yeah, yeah. And so we have a dichotomy here, right? We have a differentiation of roles where the project team performs the work and the project managers ensure nothing gets in the way of it and provides everything needed so the work can be performed effectively. Good dichotomy. Now,
Yeah.
my question to you is, when did you first catch on to this mutual ownership, this division of labor inside of a project?
My answer is going to sound facetious, but probably early on in my career when I was the grunt doing the work and looking at my project manager drinking coffee and reading newspaper in his office. I told you that was facetious. No, I truly early on in my career, I understood that there is this dichotomy that, and the nice thing was I had project managers who would be available to listen to things that I, as one of the members of the team, noticed. And I could bring it to him or her and say, what about this? And they could then alter culture or environment or something. So whereas I understood it early, I also felt as I was part of the team because my management listened to me as well.
Yes, yes, I as well had managers who were great mentors in being active listeners. I had that supervisor who actually assigned us as PMs, but then I had a manager when I first started who actually worked on the entire other side of the nation, who actually took me on as a mentee. And I would watch him and observe him and listen to him on conference calls. And he demonstrated this not taking on the work itself, yet taking the accountability of the work on, such that they didn't they knew that their role was critical in some decisions and activities.
Yeah, and I always had a great respect for those project managers who not only did that, who not only mentored their team, but once in a while they would roll up their sleeves and actually go into teaching mode or working mode alongside the team so that they showed themselves as being true mentors, not better than or more loftier than their team, but actually part of the team. I had a lot of respect for those types of project managers, which is something that I've always tried to do in my career as it progressed.
Yeah, yeah, there is nothing like seeing the lesson in action and getting immersed in the teaching and actually participating in the action that you're learning that actually enforces greater depth of understanding.
Absolutely. Well, good. Now I think we have a good basis for that. So if we look at the fact that if we're looking at this domain, keeping the team itself focused to make sure that activities are running smoothly, to make sure that everything is happening according to the plan. So besides planning and establishing the appropriate culture and environment, what are some of the things that you as a project manager have found to be effective in terms of ensuring that this continues or occurs? I think we can devote much of the project, much of this podcast just to this question, right?
Right. This is actually highlighted in the domain itself. If you pull out that domain from the guide, it actually gives you a great punch list. And I was going through this punch list and I was looking through and I was thinking, was there anything missing? Is there anything I that it says you should be paying attention to? It brings things that I agree with that are relevant.
Mhm.
Number one, um, is the project moving forward? It's not the monitoring controlling. It's actually the interaction of it's not the analysis of the changes because that's over in another part of our work. But this is where we're just observing things. like tasks going through a task board or the percentages going up in the work items. Number two, are the processes appropriate? Is this too process heavy? Are people spending so much time with the checklist that it's getting in the way of the work?
Boy,
Go
I've,
ahead.
no, I've been in those situations where, and a lot of times this came from the client who was checking off their own checklist as opposed to really understanding what it took to progress. And they asked for all sorts of statistics. And so we ended up creating teams just to monitor the work and report on it as opposed to having us just work on it. And that's, to me, that was just a waste of resources for something that somebody wanted to tick a box. Anyway, I interrupted you with that, but
Oh no, let's stop there for a couple minutes because I not only want to agree with you, but I want to highlight something for our consulting friends. A lot of us hang out our shingles either with one of the big four or big eight consulting firms, and they say, hey, if the client wants checklists, great. It generates money, it generates revenue, it allows us to put more people on the project. But at the same time, if you look at good practice, what actually makes a project better
yeah,
is the processes are established that meet the needs of the project and nothing else.
right.
And
Now,
go ahead.
if my project was to put a man on the moon or a woman on the moon, then I might put in extra quality assurance and extra reporting and extra controls. But most of our projects aren't that life altering or life critical as putting a person up on the moon, right? So it's
Right, right. And what this is really hard because it's not a quantitative call, it's a qualitative call.
yeah,
And you can't really give people a number as to saying this number of checklists is appropriate and this isn't. It's if you go deep into the math of the statistics, there are ways to solve that. But frankly, experience itself is the best teacher for
pre-
actually showing us what it's like.
precisely. Yeah.
Now, there's other
Yeah.
things, okay? Managing the physical resources. Boy, this actually when I was upgrading cell towers, this actually took my took a big part of my time during this. Like I'd fly into Atlanta, Georgia on a Friday, getting ready to take over on Monday morning, and the rental company had just called my one of my peers and had said, if you don't come down here by 3 in the afternoon, the Department of Transportation has rented out all our cranes. You need to put money down right now, or I'm going to have to give it to them. And these type of issues with fiscal resources were happening all the time.
Well, it's not just physical resources like you're talking about nuts and bolts and that sort of thing, but it's also human resources, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So a lot of times, whether working agile, typically in predictive though, we would actually schedule in resource acquisition right into our project plan because if we didn't, let's say I've got 50 developers coming on in 6 months. I better start looking at the environmental factors. I better start looking at the configuration of those machines, the negotiating terms of delivery of those machines so that they're
Oh
on
boy.
desks in those 6 months. And if you say, oh, I've got people showing up on Thursday, maybe I better go out to Best Buy and get some computers. That doesn't work for a lot of projects. So, yeah, physical resources, human resources, absolutely critical.
And the contracting itself, that's 4 to 6 weeks right there.
Yeah.
You have to, in your planning, establish not only that these contracts are going through and they will go through, but you need to do some really good risk analysis and identification around the people that you're going to bring into the project due to their special skills.
Yeah. And I've had situations with contracting, particularly with equipment, where our firm, when I worked for a firm, could get better deals from suppliers and vendors than the government clients that we had. And so even though the project was on behalf of the government, we ended up holding the contract, getting the better deals, and then seconding that or moving those over to the government at point of at some point in the project. But it's an interesting thing. Now we ended up with two sets of procurement issues as opposed to just one. So yeah, there's all sorts of things. And if it's not in your plan, in your schedule, that whole project work domain starts to fall apart because you haven't set up the culture or the environment correctly.
And then, oh, exactly. And then you have the verification of change and the application of change. This is something that I highlighted in my class in the old version of PMP training. It's basically the application of the approved changes are happening in this space. But you also have the verification. You're going back and saying, okay, we applied the change. What's it doing? Is it doing what we expected? Do we need to respond further?
Right.
Is it creating what we wanted? And so you have a lot of that change. And finally, you have continuous improvement and training and learning and growing. I really appreciate Ray Kroc for his statement, the way he looked at the McDonald's Corporation. When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot.
Mm-hmm.
There's that aspect in all projects that you need to leave it with something more than you entered into it.
Yeah. So when I first threw this question out to you, now that we've had that discussion, one of the assumptions was that we as project managers are responsible for creating or establishing that culture, that environment, that process-driven approach to getting our work done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even more important is continuing that culture, environment, process-driven approach so that it continues to move smoothly. A lot of
Yeah,
times people create their project plan and then it becomes shelf help as opposed to truly something that we're working on a daily basis.
I see this as indicative of early recognition of project management. I'm not saying comprehension, I'm saying recognition.
Yeah.
Documents like the business case and the project charter and the team charter tend to gather dust at the beginning of the project and are never referenced again. This is a good time for you to be thinking about these things. And again, it's like giving yourself a high five in the mirror in the morning, and at the end of the day, looking and say, did I really do something worth my attention?
So can I also add to this by taking a small off ramp from what the PMBOK said and those great details that you provided to us?
Please do.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about in past podcasts is things like rewards and recognition. So you want to keep that team happy. So rewards and recognition is one aspect. Team building activities along, and I don't mean some let's esoteric thing, but true team building, because my belief, and I've talked about this, Tim, in these podcasts, my belief is it's the relationships among the staff that also help create that culture, that work environment that makes the project go smoother and stay on track.
What type of team building have you done in the past that you see works effectively?
We've done everything from games, so you divide people up in teams and have friendly competition. Um, there's one situation where we actually went on, you've heard of Outward Bound,
Uh-huh.
perhaps? We had an outward bound experience where we went outside and we had team building exercises, everything from climbing small hills by having planks tied to our legs in teams of four, to passing people through a spider web of ropes, to, I mean, there are all sorts of things, but just the whole idea of having people solve problems while working in teams and a little healthy competition alongside just to make it more enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit more fundamental than you, but I agree with you. Those are good. But think about this, pairing. When you have two team members who are learning the same skills, put them together
Yeah.
See if they can actually create some innovation. And then we have work shadowing and reverse shadowing, even when even when it's not formal. If there's an opportunity, somebody wants to learn something beyond their skills, make it happen. It's going to make them happy. It's going to give them a sense of understanding and comprehension.
Yeah.
There's a lot of benefits to it. And then finally, the big deal is, like you said, recognition.
Mhm.
Not just rewards, not just bonuses and attaboys and pieces of chocolate and donuts, but sitting down and spending 15 minutes a week with the people closest to you are interacting. And even if you don't talk about the project work, engaging with them, listening to them, understand their world, because this is where you get the knowledge that they're not telling you, their expectations, their fears. And this actually helps you integrate what they truly need if they're going to be effective team members.
That's interesting. I just watched a TED Talk this week by a woman named Margaret Heffernan.
Mhm.
I hadn't of her before, but she's put together teams. And sometimes she'll bring together some very highly technical teams. Or I think at one point she had a team of Green Berets. Well, these people are all action, 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 right? But what she would do is she'd bring them together and she would forbid them to talk about the project just to get to know each other. And she found that by doing that, the relationships would develop. And as a result of that, the work went much better and the creativity was higher. The collaboration along the team allowed the work to go smoother and complete faster.
That reminds me of a story I read in the Smithsonian magazine when I was a child. They had a ritual on a Friday night. They'd close the museum up and they'd get out of one of the alligator tanks and they'd put ice in it and they'd put beer and soda in it and they'd sit around. The only rule that you had is you're not allowed to talk about the field that you're an expert in. And yeah, I was thinking, how brilliant is this? In some ways, I do not like consulting because it means 25 to 50% of the time you're living out of a suitcase.
Right.
But the other side of that means you're having breakfast with these people, you're having dinner with these people and dessert, and you're talking, you're learning how to interact and build a social animal that you all share.
And lest we forget, and this is especially important for those listening to us now who are climbing the ranks of project management, your stakeholders are equally important to your
Mm.
success. When we did our teamwork, we ensured that our stakeholder, our client resources people were with us along the way. If we went, for example, when I had a project in Hawaii, if we had a beach day on a Saturday, the client was invited to come to beach day on Saturday with us. We just wanted to have that remarkable interaction among people such that the relationships kept the project moving along. And I remember very specifically one time we had our federal government oversight people come in. They came into one of the big rooms that we had, talked to several people, came back out and asked, so who in there is your client staff and who in there is your staff? So to me, that said that we had truly integrated a team, not as two halves, but as a complete team. So, and that was important to us.
I thought about this a lot. A lot of project managers should consider this too, because when you define team, the team are the people who perform the work of creating the deliverable. And we have to expand that understanding to go up to and including providing requirements, providing feedbacks,
Yeah.
user acceptance testing. So in most of my projects, I consider my stakeholders as team members themselves. And you have to think about it that way. They have a
Yeah.
critical role.
Yeah, because a project is a project of individual of team members, but there's not the us versus them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've talked about everything except communication. From a project manager, again, thinking the project work domain where it's our responsibility to grease the wheels basically to make the project go well. So where does communication fit in? How does it help us get this work done?
Where information does not flow, work does not get done. It's that simple.
Yeah,
The flow of communication demonstrates the flow of the work itself. How's that?
that's good. And from a project management point of view, is there a right amount of communication? Is there over communication? Is there under communication? I suspect all of those are true.
Yeah, so the PMBOK says the level of communication and the level of formality of communication is going to be appropriate for the activity and the work being performed. And so basically, what we're talking about is it's going to have to be clear enough and effective enough and urgent enough to make sure that number one, the work can progress. And number two, the lack of the communication is not going to stall the work.
Yeah, and I've worked in environments where, for example, I've had a deputy director of a of a very large department would want every single one of my, well, not just mine, but our team's queries and inquiries or reports out to go through her first. She would read, I'd present a monthly 60-page status report, and she would read every single word before it went out. I have had other projects where they would come in and say, just the highlights. Just give me the highlights. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. That's fine. And so not only when we do our communication, we also have to understand the person receiving the communication and what it is that how it is that they want it.
On the PMP exam, the Project Management Professional Certificate exam, some of the most devious questions are you talk to a stakeholder and they're not happy. What do? Right? And most often it's either they're not getting the information, they feel they're not being heard, or they're not participating in the role that they think is appropriate for their experience and their skill. And it all resides down to communication. Communication either demonstrates that information is or is not flowing, or demonstrates that we have what we need to get work done.
Well, and I think in that whole situation too, communication absolutely is critical, but also we need to, and I guess this is what you're saying with communication, we need to find out why it is that they feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the problem is, once again, people are not normally taught to think in business processes in the context of how people effectively and efficiently get work done. And it's our job to help them basically in the way they phrase their frustration to actually find something that can assist us in clarifying that and removing those obstacles.
Oh, absolutely. And here's what I found, and I think this is something based on years of observations over several projects, is you and I in project management roles have done this over and over and over again till it becomes second nature. Most of our clients, our peers on the client side, the ones who are asking us for more detail or the ones who are feeling like they're being left out or the ones who are unhappy at certain times, it's their first time often. And so they really don't know. And so what I learned in my latter years as a project manager is to take them aside and I don't want to say educate them because that sounds kind of condescending, but to truly bring them alongside and say, here's how we're going to approach this. What do you think of that? Just so that they're always aware of the things that are second nature to you and me so that they can pick up on when it's their turn to contribute. So it's just so important.
That's the continuous improvement component that belongs in this domain.
Right.
And I see this happening all the time. It's basically training and educating people without them knowing it's happening. It's an art. And again, if you find this tedious and boring, you're going to be doing it on your first project and you're going to be doing it on your last project, because there's one constant: humans and human behavior. And you're going to have people that have never experienced this on each and every project. So you're just going to have to start from ground zero at the beginning of the project. And as people come into your project, you have to reset and reset and reset.
You do. And one of the most basic communication techniques on a project is the weekly status report, or by whatever the frequency is. But here's what often happens. People go, I can put everything in the weekly status report, and it's not my problem if the other people don't read it. That's the only communication I really need to do. And
Well, yeah, there's three major rules in project management. Number one, if communication fails, it's the project manager's fault. Number two, if the project fails, it's the project manager's fault. And number three, it's the project manager's responsibility. That acknowledgement. When you send information out, acknowledgement says that the receiver received that information, they know what to do with it. Okay? That acknowledgement is necessarily the responsibility of the project manager. You cannot rely on assuming that if people don't say anything, they're okay.
that's exactly one of my longtime mentors once said, who has the most to lose? If you always answer that question with you as that as the answer, then it's up to you to make sure that not only is the information sent, but that it's also caught.
Right, right. That's the only way to ensure communication remains effective.
By the way, he also gave me the 7 times rule. If you've heard the 7 times rule of communication in consulting or in projects,
Go ahead.
they haven't heard it until they've heard it 7 times.
Yep, they process it. If once you hear people saying, I'm so tired of Tim repeating this, I have a smile on my face, because I'm finally getting through to them. And it, again, it's tedious and it's boring to be the role that has to repeat things, but this is human nature. This is the way we all learn, and we often forget that we went through this same process ourselves.
We did. The only way it became second nature to us is because we went through it so many times. By the way, I was looking again at that bulleted list you were talking about from the definition of project work.
Uh-huh.
Communication is listed as the third bullet. I think it should have been the first, because it is, to me, it is the ultimate part of setting up a true project work environment and making sure it happens.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Communication, information is what resides and passes through us all and allows us to take action, understand what's happening. And it's a process that, again, we can't rely on to happen by itself. We have to, we don't want to meddle with it too much, but at the same time, we can't just, like we've been talking, assume that it's going to be perfect.
Okay, so shall we leave the domain of that's the wrong word, because we're talking about project work domain. Shall we leave the topic of communication and try another one?
Yeah, let's go into change management and change control, because this is another part. Now, this is not approving changes and assessing and prioritizing change requests. This is actually the application of change and the verification that the change occurred and it is effective as planned. Now,
Okay.
the question is, as you go throughout your days and as you go out throughout the week that you're working on, how often do you think to yourself, I need to focus on change now?
So let me separate change management and change control. Because if I think of change management, I think of organizational change management. And so in dealing with my project teams as a project manager, whether I'm doing predictive or agile, we're doing the requirements gathering, we're designing systems. But at the same time, the organizational change management team needs to be working with the end users, those who will inherit the system as users, need to be working with and understanding their true needs. And so to me, when it comes to change management, I start worrying about it right at the beginning of the project. When it comes to change control, that's a different animal. That's more as we go further down the line and we see things that need to change. They either come up from a regulation change or a change in management, something along those lines. We end up dealing with those further. So I don't worry about those much until we're actually into much more of the delivery mechanism. But I just wanted to differentiate in my mind between those two topics.
Yeah, the way I position it is when I talk about change management, it's the organizational or the environmental change, whether the project needs to respond to it or whether the project was created as a response to that change. And so we're talking about objectives here. We're talking about strategy, the very reason the project exists. So it's change management is an objective discussion where change control is what you say. It's the tactics, it's the logistics.
Yeah.
It's basically going through and saying, okay, we're doing a little course correction. We gathered our data, we looked at the weather, we looked at the stars, we looked at the waves on the ocean, and we need to turn the ship a little bit.
Yeah, and so going back to the change management, and the reason I brought it up that way is can you imagine delivering an incredibly elegant solution that you find out doesn't work because you didn't understand the work processes? And so rather than try to change the work processes of people who are very efficient anyway, you've just created havoc with the elegant solution that doesn't work for them.
And sometimes it's not even your fault.
Right.
I remember creating a customer relationship management solution for sales, and it was stateside sales. This is an international company, and they loved it. But the next week, they said, "Oh, just shelve that. We're not going to need it anymore. We're reorganizing." They shrugged and they said, "Oh, well, you did a great job. Thank you." And that's when I learned nothing, nothing in a project is saying that it's valuable unless the client says it's valuable. The value is not determined by the project manager or even the team sometimes. It's the people who are going to eventually receive what we're creating that say this is worthy of our attention or not. And it's not indicative of whether you're doing a good job or not. It's
Well,
indicative of so many other factors that you can't say, I could have done a better job and they would have accepted it.
yeah, and that's one thing that I always worked with my users on. I would say, we have 25 users working with us on this, or 25 subject matter experts, let's call them. You're representing your entire group of people. So whatever you come up with, you're doing it for the benefit of all of your peers. Now, understand this. We could have selected 25 different people and had a slightly different solution. So you're not going to create a wrong solution. You're just going to create one that you see will work for your environment. And so as long as people understand that they're not going to mess up because they didn't understand something, we're going to work alongside them. We're going to bring them alongside. And so as long as they understand that, we end up with better control. And here's the beautiful thing is when you get them involved early on, they become your best ambassadors when it's time to implement.
Yes, 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 indeed. This is why communication has to be part of this. There's a sense of urgency and understanding when the objectives of a project change or that we need to make an appropriate change. And it's our job to advise, but it's also our job to facilitate that change.
Yeah. And then eventually to deliver.
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, end users, subject matter experts, we couldn't do the jobs without them. Well, I guess we could do the jobs without them, but they wouldn't be very good.
So let's focus on one other topic before we wrap this up for the week. Training, continuous improvement, and growth of knowledge. This is another topic that we talked about inside of this domain. How much of your time do you actively participate in this, or is this just something you're constantly doing?
It's basically part of when I manage a project, it's part of what I do. If a project completes and my team leads aren't all better for the experience, and some of them ready to take the reins of the next project, then I have failed. If I haven't somehow improved the career or life of the subject matter experts that have been lent to me, then I have failed. And so from that perspective, I think the whole idea of not only continuously improving the processes, but continuously allowing for staff to improve their own careers, those are all part of what we as project managers need to take responsibility for on any project we work on.
Yeah, it's hard to manage work when your team is disengaged. It's really easy to manage work when you have people are engaged. And when they're learning, basically, they're satisfying their curiosity. And that's one of the primary drivers of a human. It's an easy win for your project to bring people into the work and get things done that they might otherwise not think is valuable or worthy of their attention.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the other thing that I have found that has worked well for me. I'm going to use the example of, say, collecting lessons learned periodically throughout the project. It is so easy for a project manager to delegate that. You on the change management team, lessons learned for that. You on the design team, lessons learned for that. It's so easy to delegate that. And you, quite frankly, on occasion, you should delegate that so people can learn from their own lessons learned. But at the same time, what's worked well for me is rolling up my sleeves and sitting down with the staff and me even wordsmithing some of the lessons learned myself and helping collect that. When they see me with my hands on the keyboard, interactively working with them in trying to develop a good, solid group of lessons learned, it somehow it enhances that whole experience because they're saying this is important because not only is he delegating tasks to me, but he's also actively involved.
Yeah, and not only that, it's highly reflective of how serious we take recognition because we're working with individuals who have valuable knowledge and we're spending time outside of creating the deliverable that actually, again, many people untrained would say you're not getting work done for this project. Well, yeah, but what this is the work of the project. And this actually is enhancing the work of the project, either more effective, more efficient, or just downright entertaining. And we can't discredit these humanistic components. People do better work when they're curious, when they're involved, when they realize their opinion matters.
Well, yeah, and then also selfish. I'm going to also do a little selfish confession here, using that example of the lessons learned. A lot of times, can you imagine? Let's say you got a document with 50 findings or 50 lessons learned, and you read through them and you ask a few questions and you go, "I understand this." But let's say you authored some of those. In order for you to write them out accurately so someone can understand them, you have to really understand them. And so from a selfish standpoint, a lot of times I'll get involved in something like that, whether it's that or some other document. I will actually get hands on the keyboard because my understanding is deepened. And therefore, when I am questioned about something, or if I have to give a presentation about something, I am much more able to do so because I've been in the middle of it.
And what the project manager does have to be the master of why on this project. And the primary why is, why are we setting aside time and money to get this done? And these lessons learned may seem inconsequential, but they're individual bricks and rocks that we're putting together with mortar to build a foundation and a wall that says this is the project and here's the value and here are all the individual pieces of why this project has to occur, had to occur, and the value that we created.
Well, and think about the flexibility and adaptability that you end up creating because you dealt with it on this project. When you move to your next project, same sorts of processes, same sorts of environmental or cultural aspects have to be put in place. But now you've got a different set of individuals, a different set of circumstances. So you have to tweak them, sometimes a lot. But because you've learned from one project and taken it to another, you've become flexible, adaptable, and each project becomes much more easily put together from a project work domain just because you're paying attention to those factors.
Increase in knowledge and experience equals confidence. And executives, and especially your sponsor, will start growing in their perception of your value and the value of project management itself. It's an indicator of somebody who takes great responsibility and accountability in their formal role in the project.
Yeah, responsibility and accountability. I like that. That
Yep.
really helps set that environment in place.
So we're down to our last question, and I really like this question. I think we should keep this going for our next season too. If you were to recommend a fresh or aspiring project management to participate in the project work yet not directly do the work, what would you tell them to do besides go through our punch list that we talked about, just off the top of your head?
I'm going to throw some cliches at you.
Please do.
Jump in with both feet, roll up your sleeves, get a sweat on, but just make sure that you are, yes, maybe you're not doing the actual work, but you are working with those who are. And so therefore just, get involved. When they see you with your sleeves rolled up, when they see you walking over with, and I've done this, with a second cup of coffee that you put on their desk and sit down next to them so you can have that conversation. It's an amazing thing that you can do for your team to make sure that that environment is always relationally ready to do the work.
Yeah, and there are simple indicators that our reports can help us with. Is the project work moving forward? Yes or no? If it's no, okay, how can we best get together to figure out what the root cause is? Is the group, is the team, are they gelling? Are they maturing? Are they going through the Tuckman model? If we have an indicator that an individual may be a blockage or an impediment, is it their engagement? Is it their contributions to the work? And how are we to fix this? And all of this is what we're using to do this. And we're using our things like communication and the management of physical resources and the management of our contracts and all those things.
Boy, that is so important. And again, it comes down to relationship.
You notice I didn't talk about monitoring, controlling. I was talking about people here.
So and again, from here, and here's how I started my career. I started with the technical aspects, process, Gantt charts, all that stuff. Important, foundational. But until you can develop those relational aspects, you're only going to be a rote project manager as opposed to a truly effective one. So I would say, yes, get the basics in place, and you've got those. Otherwise, you wouldn't be probably even listening to this podcast. But let's start working on those other ideas, those other ideals, to make sure that that team works well with each other and with you.
Excellent. And so in the next week or two, as we go and transition into a new year here, where can we reach you if we have questions about your comments here and the participation that you had in this show?
Certainly on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. I would direct people to my website, but what LinkedIn is an easy format back and forth. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, and for myself too, I'm engaging more and more in LinkedIn these days.
So what do we got? Have we got about 3 domains left? Kind of.
Yeah, we have 3 more domains, and I would recommend that we do a wrap up
Yeah,
after. Yeah, and I would recommend that after our last domain, we do a wrap up as a completion of our season, and then we can start working into our next season.
perfect. Good. All right. Until next week.
Thanks again, and thanks everybody for showing up.